Greetings to all. I'm Kirill Krivalap, and I lead partner of international consultancy company Civit, and probably for the third time in recent 12 month, I will moderate the energy-related panel. I probably should launch some barometer now. So energy, we probably would like to have the most boring discussion that nothing would happen. So power would be in a socket, heat and warmth in would be in a heated battery, and we wouldn't be bothered by energy. But unfortunately, the situation is absolutely different. We probably had the most challenging summer in our history. We lost, because of Russia, 9 gigawatt of capacities. We had power plant blocks on servicing. And now we enter in the winter, and we will speak about the readiness to that winter. And despite everything, we're optimists. We expect it's not going to be the last winter, and we will see the more winters in future. And the second part of the panel would be devoted to the strategic issue, how are we getting ready for upcoming winters. And we have absolutely relevant panel members today. We expected to have Mr. German Galushenko, unfortunately, due to the objective reasons, and really we have the preparation to the season rolling over, but we have acting head of NAC Ukrenergo, Oleksiy Breft. We have advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine on energy. So it's sort of a helicopter view umbrella to be addressed to you, dear Natalia Boyko. And we have Alexei Chernyshov, who is not only the head of the management board of NAK Naftogaz, but he's a visionary who's been in a different jobs, and he has much wider picture than pure Naftogaz. So we'll start with this. Oh, but I forgot to mention a very important guest of ours, Jeffrey Pyatt, assistant to the State Secretary, Bureau on Energy Resources, and we will refer to him on international dimension of our energy situation. So I probably will start with Natalia, because Natalia, from her job, probably sees the widest picture in terms of the upcoming season. And we probably can ask, are we ready? To what extent? Whether state has built something, whether private companies has constructed something, whether our networks are ready, our people, our partners, are we ready? Thank you. In fact, such a cool format of discussion to an extent like our meeting, but in a different format and a different layer. So all good. We do enter a very challenging winter season, and because business is here and people who are accustomed to make a very pragmatic decisions and bear responsibility for develop its projects and its life. So preparation for this winter was very challenging. However, I am confident that we are approaching in a relatively good state. Out of the things that we were keen to do and what we are working at, that was, first of all, to restore our capacities to the most possible extent. I think we are in a relatively good shape entering this winter as of now, and by the capacity of power generation available in the system, we feel a bit of comfort right now, and I do hope that this comfort would not relax us too much. We would not lose the feeling of a challenging upcoming winter, because the winter most likely will be challenging. Russia will attack the energy infrastructure as soon as the temperature will drop. So we have to be focused, we have to make pragmatic decisions. But in my understanding from a helicopter view, the power generation is ready, is prepared for the winter. What we have in the state-owned hands, in the private-owned hands, and utility community-owned hands, entering the winter in a good shape. Every repair company was managed properly, was under control, was scrutinized carefully, and adhered to the timetables. When we speak about cities and utility tracks, a lot has been done as well, because we were working not only with the city's reserves, we utilized very pragmatically the reserve of our partners. And Jeffrey, in particular, leads a separate team of a big friends and partners of Ukraine in energy, assisting us to bring equipment in, to bring finance in, to deliver humanitarian aid in. Private business also, to an extent, at least demonstrates a significant state of readiness to establish an alternative generation and move in that direction. What we failed to do, we failed in things which were not dependent on us. Because when we speak about the availability of equipment, this is very much limited. And sometimes we even see the competition between procurements in between the companies of buying the same equipment. And it's not the competition between private and public sector. That may be the competition in public sector. That could be the competition between donors and public companies. And we were scrutinized these cases very carefully in terms of satisfying the most critical points. There is not enough equipment. The demand in Ukraine is significant. And in order to work, we request a lot, we book things a lot, and it's not about the money, it's about time. The second thing, especially in the regional dimension, the teams who are able to service, to manage these projects from the technical standpoint, there is definitely a lack of professional additional reserve which would be able to support our decisions made and meet the objectives identified. But still, the personnel lack, which is felt in the private sector, is the same way felt in the state sector. We are far less flexible in terms of salaries. And when we deep dive in the utility dimension, it's even more complicated. But I see the challenges in here. And the third difficult or challenging track, access to funding, access to financing. On one hand, state paid a lot of effort in order to introduce programs for businesses. We see programs from state-owned banks. We see the demand from the state to accelerate dialogue with IMF and other international financial institutions. On the other hand, the state feels the problem with attracting resource to Ukraine for Ukraine, which is going to be booked for us and the one that we're going to utilize. The situation is not going to get better because each and every one exhausts its original enthusiasm and excitement. We are going to have a very challenging negotiations with IMF. Ukraine facilities a new inspiring page, which we have, which we can apply some other tools to an extent. But nevertheless, there is no a magic button by pressing which we would have access to unlimited financial resource is unavailable. So there is a big competition in terms of access to finance. So equipment, human capital, and financial capital, three challenging tracks which we have to deal with in our workspace. If you compare the recent years and making parallels with the military aid, financial aid, so for 25 years, we're more or less secure in terms of funding. We understand that the armament and equipment which we booked is going to come. How about energy? Is equipment getting more or less? Or, well, the free discussion just we had happened, what we're going to introduce in operation by the end of this year and next year. Many projects shifted to the next year because equipment is failing to come. All this available gigawatts, which has been stamped to raise the bar high, is going to be implemented with a certain delay, which is absolutely explainable because of the timeline project development as such, and also due to the access of equipment. So what the state companies is doing for their decentralized projects, which are to an extent signal ones, we have a lot of capacities for private business, and we would like to fix this system bugs like the market of auxiliary services so we could proceed and still offer an adequate market environment for new upcoming projects. So we'll continue with electricity. Alexei We see that enemy attacks us with the drones and store the ballistic missiles, and one way or another we will feel that ballistic. A year ago from Ukrenergo, there were signals, and even in summer, whatever difficult the generation is, but we will ensure the transportation of power. And that was promising. How the situation looks now in terms of generation and transmission. Good afternoon, colleagues. The winter is going to be challenging. We, as a company that ensures the management of combined energy system, are getting ready, and we are getting ready not only since yesterday or a year ago even. It's 2.5 years of persistent preparation, and based on that, the preparation to the winter has never been stopped, even in summer, even in spring. And yes, really, we may say that the transmitting network is stable. We don't have any restrictions related to the generation capabilities, operations, and in terms of consumers. Unfortunately, what we're speaking about, we felt on ourselves even today, one of the objects owned by our company in the north of our state being attacked by Shaheds, UAVs, probably since the monthly pause. It's not the first attempt, but it led to certain after effects of original engagement. So by today, we will reinstate, we will reinsure the supply of energy, and we will stabilize the situation. Unfortunately, I do have to say, especially in the recent month, we can observe that the focus of enemy attention is being concentrated not only on the transmission network for whatever reasons, and it has been mentioned for several times, because today we're more prepared. We have stocks in our reserves. We have a professional teams who are able to restore our objects very quickly. So that focus is being expanded both to us and also to the distribution systems. In the recent months, we got far more distribution objects affected. That impacts on the regions, and people do their best to restore these capabilities as quickly as possible. In terms of generations, very basic things I've already read today, and makes me happy in that for more than 52 days now, the system operates with no restrictions, absolutely sufficient capacity of our internal power generation to satisfy the needs. Mr. Chernyshov was complaining that you burn the gas extensively now. Not that we were not prepared to do so, but we already get connected those objects that provide the heating in each and every region of Ukraine. We have started the heating season starting November 1st. So we exploit not only the gas for manufacturing, but also for heating. A very simple question, but very important one that concerns each and everyone in this room. If, for whatever reasons, there would be no attacks, whether we would agree or how much more time Trump has to cease attacks, whether we will have a blackout. According to our forecasts, according to the commitments that we have reached with the suppliers, we do not expect restrictions on power supply under the absence of attacks. It does not exclude, let's be frank, let's be honest, any local problem may happen because the restoration, the networks were restored quickly in rush, and the quality is far from being sufficient. We may have minor local issues, but I'm not saying on any large-scale problems. So it's much better if you would say a 30% probability. And good news. So then we may proceed to the gas market. Some energy companies in summer were saying that Ukrainians should buy generators. So we'll ask Alexei, do we buy the gas tanks? I know you dislike to speak about the preparation to the heating season, but in terms of the market of centralized generation, it's difficult to imagine Trump or Macron that every year in August they come and say, people, my people, France is ready to a heating season. they have different market requirements, but I'm forced to ask you because we have the battle for the light, battle for heat, but not a boring system like.
Добрий день, добрий вечір. Дуже радий всіх бачити. Дякую
Hello to everyone. I thank the organizers for the yearly conference. I thank you for maintaining this tradition. The topic we're discussing today and the countries you mentioned, as a matter of fact, they can be prepared to such challenges automatically, but they do not find themselves in the midst of war. They do not have the situation like we do. So, fortunately, we cannot really pay attention to it. And preparation to winterization is a huge challenge for all of us. I am very glad that we have all those statements about stability in Ukraine. That's very inspiring. And I can say that our energy system is ready to counter all possible challenges. But when talking about winter, we need to understand that preparation is a very conditional formula where we have to restore capacity to some extent and we have to add some additional capacity. And the third one element is to maintain all of that, to keep it going. Because now we have some conditions, in a fortnight, these conditions are going to change. So we have to keep that in mind. Additional factor in this formula is our ability to use the energy we already have effectively, because our stability is all about being able to balance production with demand. This is related to electricity output in particular, because we're discussing a certain amount of gigawatts. Every Ukrainian knows that Ukraine needs around 18 gigawatts of power. Well, 18 gigawatts, yes, that's approximate amount. But how much is enough, and what have we done to ensure that 15 gigawatts is enough? Perhaps 12 gigawatts is enough, while another 4 or 6 can be exported. That's the matter of efficiency. Like many other similar matters, it's all about efficiency, efficient use of resources that we have, and not about the abundance or adequacy of resources. This is the matter of how we can use resources effectively to ensure that we put them to use in order to develop. This is the only step that we can take. You said that we were going to discuss the gas market. What is it? I do not know whom to discuss it with, because we do not have the gas market. It's highly regulated. Most of our clients get their gas at the price which is 2 times lower than the price of the market really is. So it's highly regulated. And all the highly regulated segments in Ukraine are provided with gas. So please, if you could depict the information on the slide, on the screen, because it may be difficult to perceive it by hearing. Since the beginning of war, we were able to increase the production of gas by 7%. Mining has increased. That's a heroic effort by Укргазвидобування and Nafta, Укрнафта and Naftoburinya companies. We are also stimulating the process of private mining to ensure that there is proper motivation to do it. The export of Ukrainian gas is prohibited at the moment. And to ensure that private companies continue this activity, we buy gas from them in order to maintain their operation. And in this respect, this enables us to store an adequate amount of gas in our storage facilities, based on the understanding that there may be scenarios when additional resource is needed. I cannot rule this out. This is related to our ability to preserve the mining of gas. I'd like to congratulate everyone on the fact that today Ukraine is mining 54 billion cubic meters of gas per day. So if we make a forecast for the next year, provided that this trend is maintained and increased, we can reach even higher numbers. And we are already covering our own needs, and I would like to see the same situation in other industries, in other areas of energy development. So if we have this, the market the existence of the market can be ensured without interference from the state. Thank you, Kirilo, for bringing this up. This is important to all of us. Of course it is. That was part of the national economic strategy for 2030. Let's keep that in mind too. A brief question and answer session. How the summer attacks have influenced our capacity to store gas? Can we still claim that Ukraine can become a gas hub for Europe? First of all, Ukraine is and will be an energy hub for Europe. Let me explain why. In Ukraine, there are incontrovertible sources proving this status. The first is the amount of our reserves and our resources. They're huge. We are the third, we ranked third in Europe. We are going to reserve development capacities. We have a gas transmission system which enables us to transit gas to Europe. The third aspect is that we have the biggest storage facilities underground in Europe, amounting to several dozen cubic meters. We have been suffering these attacks of Russia. As for your question, I can provide an example. We had additional 3 billion cubic meters of gas that were pumped into our gas storage facilities by non-resident traders. This year, this amount is 10 times lower. Lower than 300 million cubic meters. Why? Because Russian attacks are influencing the reputation. They're having an adverse impact on our capacity to store gas. Although gas physically is not under threat, but the image is still having an adverse impact. That is why it's important to continue developing our own output, the mining of gas. If the country can provide its own energy needs, the first thing. Second is if the country can export energy. And this is what we are pursuing in terms of the gas. I think that by having these two aspects, and after the situation in Ukraine is stabilized, we can also export electricity abroad. Of course, our industry is not going to be restored momentarily. And the people will also be different, but Ukraine is still has tremendous potential. It is bound to be an energy hub for Europe. And almost immediately, this role can be taken up by Ukraine because this role to us is guaranteed. Interesting. Most of other Naftogaz heads would be glad if Ukrainians would spend too much gas, but I'm glad that you are articulating such strategic things. Thank you. We have tend to strategizing a bit, and now we have the presentation of Mr. Pyatt. I would like him to get connected, and we could check the quality of the connection. They're signaling that he's not with us. As I can see, he is, but I cannot see Mr. Pyatt yet. So when he is with us, we'll switch to Mr. Pyatt. Now we move on to the second part of the conversation, the strategic block. As for our strategy, I think that businesses are hearing various controversial signals. There's an energy strategy that was considered and adopted, but for obvious reasons, it is a secret for now. The state is going to build atomic energy. Obviously, we see some successes about the state gas mining company. Ms. Natalia, do we have here room for private sector in this energy recovery? Or can there be any investment projects or public companies will be responsible for it solely? Thank you. I think that without private sector, we will not be able to build Ukraine's energy industry. I believe there will be two tendencies. On the one hand, my colleagues are completely right in counting our capacity and how to save it as much as possible. But on the other hand, In terms of the flexibility of the energy system and its efficiency, gigawatts can be different. Actually, will be useful for our system, or as useful as possible. It will be more correct to direct the development of our energy industry in a certain way. I am not a fan of solar energy without the ability to stock this energy, because the way sun produces energy is not very stable. Does not fit the needs of our consumer, so it does not really satisfy our demand. We need to move in the direction of manure capacities. We need to take advantage of the wind energy becoming cheaper, so we have that incentive in the private sector. I would like private sector to be able to fill this niche of wind energy. We are having an internal corporate discussion on this, but I do not favor state-led projects in wind energy. I would like us to have commercial projects for private businesses here to make them interested in it, and small manuring capacity, small gas capacity that is now being built. It is very quick in being installed, and it can cover the peak moments in power consumption. So this is the role that the private businesses can play. And there are some unpopular or complex projects or large projects that can balance the energy system. They will be the responsibility of the state, because in the foreseeable years, 7 years, private businesses will not be able to commit to long-term projects. That is going to be extremely difficult to get that benefit of the doubt from private money in order to get them on board in these long-term projects. I hope this will happen one day, but not today. As a next stage, in short term, it's important whether the Ukraine facility will work and how it will work for Ukrainian businesses. What will be the conditions of access to this finance? If we have it, this will be a very good incentive, and it will be particularly useful to developing the sorts of capacity that we need. Alexei, getting back to you now. Do you feel the incentive activity from the private sector? What are the signals? And are we still discussing the idea of decentralized generation that was actually discussed last year? I have already mentioned this number a week ago and 2 weeks ago. Now we have more than 350 megawatts of divided generation. Most of these objects are related to gas peak generation. Listening to my colleagues here, I recall how I came to work in Ukrenego 20 years ago, and the peak generation in 2004 was 31,000 gigawatts. So the numbers that we have now, 16 to 18 gigawatts, is a twofold decrease from the numbers that we had in 2004. So this is the basis, the starting point that we use to describe our consumption. Talking about divided generation, I can make an announcement, which is quite an interesting one in my opinion. Every Ukrainian region today, oblast I mean, is engaged in preparations for so-called passports of energy independence. In my opinion, this marks a certain inflection point in our mindset, which is important for every region to realize one simple thing, that critical infrastructure facilities and population have to have their demands met locally. We have prepared an ideal mix of how energy should be developed regionally by understanding our capacity and our means. 50% of this generation has to be developed thanks to renewable sources. 25% should be accounted for by peak or guaranteed capacity, and another 15% should be guaranteed by storage equipment. I have had a number of meetings and I keep repeating this plan. Our foreign partners have given their approval to this plan, and we also gotten the approval of our investors. And when these plans are finalized and presented to foreign businesses and Ukrainian businesses, we will be able to see the most important moment in the energy independence of every Ukrainian region. And this is the idea we're going to put to practice this and next year.
Dear Alexei, when we speak about the gas peaks, do we have enough gas? And what had changed since this year in terms of regulations and the market capacities? Well, the first question, a very short answer, yes, enough gas. The second question, what had changed during this year in terms of regulations? I think that comprehensively or systemically we still operate based on the conditions that we had last year. We do see that globally speaking about the global things, there are moratoriums and prohibitions on change prices that doesn't stipulate any private developments for issues related to business and regulation, where the market is already regulated. So there were some technological things like stimulation of divided generation, connections, simplifying, making better. But in terms of conceptual changes or liberalization, unfortunately not. We understand that the war is going on. On the other hand, we have to be clear that 85-90% of Ukrainian energy is a state-owned, and state ownership, whatever way it is always from the efficiency standpoint, is not going to win against the private supplier. That's worldwide, not only in Ukraine. That's absolutely logical. And our task is to move gradually in several directions. Firstly, not completely, but to a maximum possible extent to deregulate that segment, to introduce market everywhere where it possible, and the privatization of everything possible. We see and we understand it's difficult to do during the war. There are objective problems and risks. But unless we do so, we can't expect on the development of that branch of industry. We have to attract private capital into energy sector. Ukraine never been so called, how do I say, the best attractive place for investments before the war. Even during the war, it is far more difficult. So our task is to do everything possible to liberalize, to lift the markets for all types of energy. Let's have a look what's going on when the gas for population costs twice cheaper than the consumer's choice for generation of a resource is going to go towards the most regulated area. Tomorrow, if you have to make a hot water produced and pick between electricity or gas, and electricity has a market price and a gas twice cheaper, everything gradually shifts towards gas. Why do we consume more and more gas now? It's clear because, in fact, we transport gas at a 50% price, 50% cost of the market, and electricity gradually been raised. And it's obviously that electricity production from the gas becomes more and more interesting. So it's logical that these things should be balanced. So I exclusively for the liberalization for the market, and we see this problem of preparation to the heating system. That's a vicious circle. That's a constant repairs on the ground, and it will never be finished. It will be finished when there would be a market prices for the heat, when there would be possibility to develop these networks. We are the hostages of this situation. We have to move gradually to liberalization, even in the given circumstances. Let's not to forget that electricity price changed during the war, and that was liberalization. And it provided us with an opportunity to improve the situation in electric generation. So that was my response. And yes, my first response, yes, we have enough gas. Natalia, shall we continue with regulations on electricity market? I see there were quite several changes with some good news for future. So can you regulate the changes in regulatory field? Definitely the situation became better with connections. We have feedback from the real ongoing projects. It's much easier for them to get connected and plugged to the gas and electric networks. I think the situation in terms of interaction with the local authorities been improved. Not everywhere, because we tend to collect a living feedback and to support in a way when we see the situation gets to the dead end. But I think that's a central major green light that our generating capacities should be felt everywhere, in every corner of Ukraine. At the same time, when we speak about overall different segments of markets, we have price caps. We have a very specific case with a correlation of price in Ukraine and the price of import. We received the possibility technically to receive more import in Ukraine, and we'll see how Ankara will manage with that in terms of regulation and management. We see that the depth regulation sits with Parliament, but that's just a first step and is not going to be automatic solution for the problem. Following the inaction of this law, we will have to pay much more efforts in order to bring us to this track and access to financing. So the situation is getting better slowly, but we would like to make it quicker, more dynamically, and more visible. But at the same time, I think that this acceleration and activation in market in terms of access to the banking products and financing has its positive impact, and banks regularly brief us on some successes from the standpoint of credits and loans issued and what are the dynamics in terms of the new clients. But this is not a breaking through moment, it's not a critical point yet. I agree with Alexei with many things. We have to be pragmatic. We have to be clear that not every generating capacity could be delivered with anything but for gas. We have a very challenging regions, frontline adjusted, and energy specialists, they know these hotspots by names, and the pressure of social dimension on energy sector exists everywhere. And on every meeting when we discuss, we would like to get closer to market. We would like to have clarity that our relations would be less regulated, would be oriented towards European templates. But we have to be clear whether we as a society are ready to survive that breaking moment. Because I do remember the discussions on raising the prices on electricity. Not all politicians are ready to survive that for the second time, because the response was difficult. And we managed to raise the price for a bit. But at the same time, the business price is formed in a different way. There is a subsidiary taking place. There are many difficult subjects which are socially sensitive. They are overlapped with other difficult subjects related to our current reality. And how do we match this social dialogue and not to lose this social discussion? I don't know the answer. So I think we have to be the presenter of adequate messages in our teams, in our businesses, in our surrounding. I think COVID demonstrated that the medical system works a lot, and now we see that energy is worse. So we'll continue messaging. So our third attempt to fight the battle, Mr. Payet, can you hear us? I'll remind two questions. maintaining our international support in terms of energy provision, and advices in terms of developing our system for future. Can you hear us, sir? We can hear you finally.
Talk for a minute. I don't want to worry about the technology too much. Let me say, first of all, just how wonderful it is to be back at the Kief International Economic Forum and to speak on this issue. I was able to hear much of the presentation. I, first of all, really want to applaud my friend Alexei Chernysov for the progress that has been made at Naftogaz, which is so important to the long-term resilience and reform of Ukraine's energy system. Kyrylo, you asked earlier about the two challenges that we're trying to focus on simultaneously. One is the coming winter. And in that regard, I'm very proud of the work that my team has led in the G7 plus support mechanism. As I think everybody knows, we have contributed over $5 billion of US support to Ukraine's energy sector since the start of the full-scale invasion. We had $325 million of additional emergency support that Secretary of State Blinken announced on September 11th when he was in Kief. That is assistance that will focus on repairing and restoring as much generation capacity as possible for this winter, so that Putin will fail in his efforts to weaponize the winter against the people of Ukraine. But as Kyrylo said, we also need to be working on next winter and the long-term integration of Ukraine with the European Union. In that regard, Natalia made the most important point, which is that over the long term, the recovery of Ukraine's energy sector is going to be fundamental to the long-term process of reconstruction and the competitiveness of Ukraine's economy. And so from that regard, we are focused like a laser beam on how to create the conditions that facilitate more private sector investment. The Ukrainian government is doing its part with its focus on reform, and I want to applaud everybody across the Ukrainian government who has continued to work on the issues of energy sector reform, even while fighting to defend your country. In this regard, we had an MOU which Secretary Blinken signed last year, which laid out specific measures with a special focus on the issues of corporate governance reform. The reform of corporate governance at state enterprises to meet OECD standards remains a top priority. That is true at Naftogaz, and again, Alexei deserves great credit for the progress that he has made in that regard. That's true at Energoatom. That is true at Ukrenergo. Having corporate boards which reflect the highest European standards and which are consistent with Ukraine's future membership in the European Union. So the United States has tried to stand steadfast in that regard. But the reason these reforms are so important is also because that's what will facilitate what Natalia talked about, which is increasing private sector investment in the energy sector, both for renewables, for clean energy, and for the baseload thermal power capacity that Ukraine will need underneath those renewables. I have said at the Berlin Recovery Conference, at the London Recovery Conference, and on every other occasion that Ukraine is not a charity case when it comes to energy issues. Ukraine will be a European energy superpower because of the assets that you enjoy, your strong nuclear fleet, your significant wind and solar assets, your great potential for biomass as an energy source, and the resilience and ingenuity that Ukrainians and Ukrainian companies have demonstrated in the face of this brutal and unprovoked invasion. The United States is positioning itself to help. I will do more of that next week at the COP29 conference in Baku, when Ukraine will be a priority for me in all of my engagements with the rest of the international community. We're also working closely across the Biden administration. So, for instance, our Development Finance Corporation has just announced a new $50 million reinsurance facility, brokered by Aon and distributed by ARX, which is a Ukrainian subsidiary of Fairfax Financial Holdings, which will build a portfolio of war risk insurance projects, including for renewable energy. I want to finish up by really underlining, and I will do this, as I said, in Baku next week as well, the U.S. focus on our support to Ukraine's energy sector. That is a bipartisan priority for Republicans and Democrats that I engage with every single week in our Congress. We all understand that energy is fundamental both to Ukraine's successful defense of its sovereign territory and to Ukraine's long-term prosperity and future status as a member of the European Union. So we're going to continue to focus on this. We're going to continue to support, but we're also going to look to our Ukrainian partners, including the CEOs of the state enterprises like Oleksiy and Alexei, who are on stage today, to do the hard work of reforming Ukraine's system and building a future energy architecture which is aligned with the highest European standards and Ukraine's status as a member of the EU.
Дуже дякую, пане Пает.
Thank you, dear sir, dear Mr. Pyatt, and thank you for the efforts that you are paying to develop and maintain Ukrainian energy resilience. Thank you. And you hear the applause. Well, we have 5 more minutes of the panel, and I would like to continue the issue of our integration with European Union. I know we have more and more achievements in terms of integration of our networks. We have the number of plug-ins increasing and our capacity to pass and the flow that transmission is increasing. That would be my first question. My second question, under the invasion, we moved probably 1/5 of the state. We have 5 million abroad, we have 6 million IDP, we have 20% of business changing the places. And production, families, people are moving. You, as an operator, Oleksiy, do you feel from Ukrenergo side, feel the change of pattern of placing these energy forces, because Western part was underdeveloped, sort of traditionally? Is the situation changing? From our import potential, last week the Assembly General made a decision to increase from 400 gigawatt to 2,000. An invasion we started with few hundreds of megawatt. So during the invasion, we jointly made an enormous work with our closest international partners from the European Union in order to have that capacity. So 2 nuclear blocks equivalent. Yeah, that's a very sound example, just took off my words. 2,100 megawatt we had a transmitting capacity. So it's like another Chernobyl restored, almost. And that's what we are going to use from December 1st till the end of February for this month, for this winter. In that particular period, in parallel with our colleagues, we'll continue our engagement, because overall, the way the figure been developed, you take the worst case scenario of a maximum consumption, and based on that scenario, you calculate your figures. This is obviously the way that not make us extremely happy as an operator of transmission. We prefer to select the scenario once per year, but we in fact do that daily. And we expect that in spring we will have a dynamic capability to introduce respective figures for transmission capacity. And it's not going to be less than we have now, but 2,100 megawatt, that's the baseline capacity that we can maintain. And then we have an insured support, that's another 250 megawatt. And today, with the Polish operator, we work on another initiative that may provide additional amount of 150 megawatt of import. So overall, that would be 2,500 megawatt, so 2.5 nuclear blocks. That would be an enormous support for our winter if these events will take place. So the regions, geolocation, localization, we do feel that the West and such areas as Transcarpathian, Lviv, Rivne, Khmelnytsky, these considerably enhanced in terms of consumption. However, always the western part of our unified energy system was a profitable, was a profit. And from that standpoint, it's not too bad because additional consumption in the West shall balance that excessive production that been produced and been consumed, although there are additional load on transmission network. Luckily, we and our colleagues, the distribution system operators are ready, and the development plans and the schemes for the development which been developed and endorsed by the state regulator reflect that situation in increasing the relocate consumption in order not to lose that economic potential of the state, which we can ensure due to the ongoing events. So all good, no worries. Thank you. So the time has been exhausted. We won the battle of the sound, and I do hope we will won the battle for light. And at least Natalia can make a wish sitting between two Alexis to make it happen. And we, I think, heard both realistic assessment and probably an optimism for future. So hold together. Thank you, dear panelists, and let's forum to continue.